It couldn't have happened on a better Sunday.
That's what I was thinking.
So, a couple of things that I asked you guys if you have any topics or whatever you'd like me to do for Sunday. Somebody somewhere suggested a humor Sunday. So that's what I'm going to do today, especially get some laughter in just before the heaviness of Lent. But I also want to warn you that I've never done one before. So you're getting my best first shot. But laughter is one of those things that heals us. It literally heals us. It drops our blood pressure, releases endorphins, gives us less stress, all that kind of good thing. So if you want some deep and metaphysical narrative or lesson today, you're not going to get it. You're just going to get jokes. And I hope some of them are good ones to you, but I did my best. And actually, I just thought of one that's kind of an old one that is based on a hymn in the garden. They just finished singing the hymn in a church, and Mom looks down at her son and says, "Well, what'd you think of that hymn?" And he goes, "Well, I finally found out what God's name is." She said, "What God's name is?" She says, "Yeah, Andy. Andy walks with me, Andy talks with me." And I am, by the way, not the best person to select jokes because I'm particularly fond of bad jokes. Jokes like there are two penguins sitting on an ice floe. One of them looks at the other and says, "You look like you're wearing a tuxedo." And the other one says, "Who says I'm not?" See, bad ones. Two penguins on an ice floe. One of them looks at the other and says, "Have you seen my brother?" And the other says, "I don't know. What does he look like?" Bird walks into a bar wearing a tuxedo, and the bartender says, "Hey, nice tuxedo." The bird says, "How do you know I'm not a penguin?" Okay, no more penguin jokes, I swear. Now, I don't know if you like one-liners or stories, but I got a little of both. Like two fish were sitting in a tank. One looks at the other and says, "How do you drive this thing?" That's a tank joke. No? Okay, I'm working on it. I told you. What did the janitor say when he jumped out of the closet? "Supplies!" Okay. More churchy ones, maybe? A man walks into a church. He's a visitor, and it's his first time going through the doors of that particular church. It's a beautiful sunny day. He's in a great Sunday morning mood. He greets everybody and meets them with enthusiasm. Even though he doesn't know them, he sings the hymns at the top of his lungs, in spite of some funny looks he gets from those who are singing in a more dignified way. And during the greeting time, he hugs people, ignoring their offer of a polite but somewhat distant handshake. He laughs loudly and even shouts amen, an amen or two during the sermon. After the service, a few people come to him and tell him that's not how they worship at their church. They suggest that he might be more comfortable worshiping somewhere else. The man leaves the building and dejectedly sits down on the front steps, sadly wondering what he did wrong. Next thing he knows, someone sits down next to him, and it's Jesus. Jesus puts his arm around the man and says, "Don't feel bad. I've been trying to get into that church for years." So you like those? Okay, we'll stick with some more of those. Atheist scientist appears before God and says, "Well, we've figured out how to make a man without you." And God says, "All right, let me see you do it." So the scientist bends down to the ground and starts scooping up a handful of dirt. And God goes, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Make your own dirt." That's a creation joke. Okay, we'll move on. One day a teacher was talking to her first grade class about whales. The little girl had a question. Do whales swallow people? The teacher says, no. Even though they're much bigger than a person, they have throat pleats that filter their food of krill and plankton. The little girl says, but Mrs. Thurston says that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. The teacher is getting a little bit miffed and says, whales cannot swallow people. To which the little girl says, well, when I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah if he really was swallowed by a whale. And the teacher says, oh, really? Well, what if Jonah went to hell? The little girl says, well, then you ask him. Little boy was waiting for his mother to come out of the grocery store, and as he waited, he was approached by a man who asked, son, can you tell me where the post office is? The little boy said, sure, just go straight down the street a couple of blocks and then turn to your right. The man thanked the boy kindly and said, I'm a new pastor in town, and I'd like you to come to church on Sunday. I'll show you how to get to heaven. The little boy replied with a chuckle, come on, man, you don't even know where the post office is. This is for all of you older people. There's not many of you here. Little boy was visiting his grandma. And when he asked, Grandma, do you know how you and God are alike? The grandma kind of puffs up a little bit, mentally polishing her halo, and asked, no, how are we like? You're both old. No? Okay, no more old jokes then. I don't know about this one then, but I'll do it. So, a local pastor joined a community service club, and the members thought they'd have a little fun with him. So under his name badge, they printed hog collar as his occupation. And everyone made a big fanfare as the badge was presented, and the pastor responded by saying, I'm usually called like a shepherd of the sheep or something like that, but I guess you know your people better than I do. A burglar broke into a home and was looking around. He heard a soft voice say, Jesus is watching you. Thinking it was just his imagination, he continued to search again. The voice says, Jesus is watching you. He turned his flashlight around and saw a parrot in a cage. And he asked the parrot if he was the one talking. The parrot said yes. So he asked the parrot what his name was. The parrot says, Moses. The burglar asked, what kind of people named their parrot Moses? And the parrot says the same kind of people who named their German shepherd Jesus. An old preacher was dying. And he sent a message for his banker and his lawyer, both church members, to come to his home. And when they arrived, they were ushered up to his bedroom, and as they entered the room, the preacher held out his hands and motioned them for them to sit on each side of his bed. And then he grasped their hands, sighed contentedly, smiled, and stared at the ceiling. For a time, no one said anything. Both the banker and the lawyer were touched and flattered that the preacher would ask them to be with him during his final moments. They were also puzzled. The preacher had never given them any indication that he particularly liked either of them. They both remembered his many long, uncomfortable sermons about greed, covetousness, and avaricious behavior that made them squirm in their seats. Finally, the banker said, Preacher, why did you ask us to come? The old preacher mustered up his strength and said weakly, Jesus died between the two thieves, and that's how I want to go. This is one of my favorites. I tell this one, and a variation of this one several times. So 3 pastors are having lunch in a diner, and one said, Since summer started, I've been having trouble with bats in my loft and attic at the church. I tried everything, noise, spray, cats, nothing seems to scare them away. And another said, yeah, me too, I've got hundreds living in my belfry and in the attic, and I've even had the place fumigated and they won't go away. And the third one says, well, you just gotta do what we did. I went up there, made them all members of the church, and I've never seen them again. All right, we'll do some one-liners again real quick. Why did the ghost go to rehab? He was addicted to booze. My wife and I laugh about how competitive we are, but I laugh more. See, we compete. So I laugh. Okay, never mind. I know, right? Have you heard about the guy who stole a calendar? They gave him 12 months. A bear walks into a bar and says to the bartender, I'll have a pint of ale. And the bartender says, what's with the big paws? The bear says, I don't know, I was born with them. Two antennas decided to get married. The ceremony was pretty boring, but the reception was excellent. See, the younger people aren't going to get those. So you're like, what's an antenna, right? Teacher is standing up in front of her class and wants to, kind of encourage them and find ways to build up their self-esteem. And so she says, anyone who thinks they're stupid, stand up. And nobody stands up. So she turns to the other side of the room. I'm sure that somebody over here thinks they're stupid. And then little Johnny stands up. And she goes, aw, Johnny, you think you're stupid? Johnny says, no, I just felt bad that you were standing up alone. Told my doctor that I broke my arm in 2 places, and he said, don't go to those places anymore. I'm looking for this one that this sounds like me. Okay, there it is. Mother went to wake her son for church one Sunday morning. When she knocked on his door, he says, I'm not going. Why not? She asked. I'll give you 2 good reasons. He said, 1, they don't like me, and 2, I don't like them. And his mother replied, well, I'll give you 2 good reasons why you will go to the church. 1, you're 47 years old, and 2, you're the pastor. A minister and a lawyer were chatting at a party. What do you do if you make a mistake in the case, the pastor says. Well, try to fix it if it's big, ignore it if it's insignificant, replied the lawyer. What do you do? And the minister replied, well, more or less the same thing. So I'll give you an example. The other day I meant to say the devil is the father of liars, but instead I said the devil is the father of lawyers, and I just let it go. A woman was at work when she received a phone call that her daughter was very sick with a fever. She left her work, stopped by the pharmacy to get some medication. She got back to her car and found that she'd locked her keys in the car. She didn't know what to do, so she called home and told the babysitter what had happened. And the babysitter told her that the fever was getting worse. She said, you might find a coat hanger and use that to open the door. And the woman looked around and found an old rusty coat hanger that had been thrown down on the ground, probably by someone else who at some time or another had locked their keys in their car. She looked at the hanger and she says, I don't know how to use this. So she bowed her head and asked God to send her some help. And within 5 minutes, an old rusty car pulled up with a dirty, greasy, bearded man who was wearing an old biker's skull rag on his head, and the woman thought, this is what you sent to help me? But she was desperate, so she was also thankful. The man got out of his car and asked her if he could help. And she said, yes, my daughter's very sick. I stopped to get her some medication and locked my keys in the car. I must get home to her. Please, can you use this hanger to unlock my car? He said, sure. Walked over to the car, and immediately the car door was unlocked and opened. She hugged the man, and through her tears, she said, thank you so much. You are a very nice man. The man replied, lady, I am not a nice man. I just got out of prison today. I was in prison for car theft, and I've only been out for about an hour. And the woman hugged the man again, and with sobbing tears cried out, oh, thank you, God. You even sent a professional. Here's a joke for all the dads out there. A young woman brought her fiancé home to meet her parents. And after dinner, her father asked the young man into a study for a chat. So, what are your plans? The father said. I'm a theology scholar, the young man replied. Admirable, the father said. But what will you do to provide a nice home for my daughter? I will study and God will provide, the young man explained. And how will you afford to raise children? The father asked. God will provide, the young man said. The men left the study and the mother asked her husband, how'd it go? So, well, very well, I like him. He has no money or employment plans, the father said, but on the other hand, he thinks I'm God. Preacher retired and moved to the country to enjoy life and practice his hobby of yard work. Needing a lawnmower, he headed into town to buy one, and on the way, he saw a sign advertising a lawnmower for sale. So he stopped at the house, and a young lad came out to greet him. The preacher asked him about the mower, and the kid said it was behind the house, and the two went to look at it. The engine was sputtering along at idle speed, and the preacher increased the speed of the engine, mowed a few strips. Satisfied that the mower would do the job, they settled on a price of $25. Later in the day, the young lad was riding his bicycle when he spied the preacher pulling on the engine starter rope. The kid stopped and watched for a couple minutes, and he asked, what's wrong? The reply, I can't get this mower started. Do you know how? The kid said, yep. Well, how do you do it? Tell me. The kid replied, you have to cuss at it. The preacher rose up indignantly. Now you listen here, I am a preacher, and if I ever did cuss, not saying I have, I've forgotten how to do it after all these years. With a wise look on his face, well beyond his years, the kid said, preacher, you keep pulling on that rope and you'll learn. The drunk stumbles along a baptismal service on a Sunday afternoon down by the river. He proceeds to walk down into the water and stand next to the preacher. The minister turns and notices the old drunk and says, Mister, are you ready to find Jesus? The drunk looks back and says, yes, preacher, I sure am. The minister then dunks the fellow under the water and pulls him right back up. Have you found Jesus? The preacher asks. No, I didn't, said the drunk. The preacher then dunks him under for quite a bit longer and brings him up and says, now, brother, have you found Jesus? No, I did not, Reverend. The preacher, in disgust, holds the man under for at least 30 seconds this time. Brings him out of the water and says in a harsh tone, my good man, have you found Jesus yet? And the old drunk wipes his eyes and says to the preacher, are you sure this is where he fell in? I liked this one as a former Catholic. So A man was brought to Mercy Hospital and went in for coronary surgery. The operation went well, and as the groggy man regained consciousness, he was reassured by a sister of mercy waiting by his bed. By the way, both Mercy Hospitals where I was born and the Sisters of Mercy were the nuns at the church that I went to, but I don't think this was written about them. Anyway, Mr. Smith, you're going to be just fine, the nun said while patting his hand. We do have to know, however, how you intend to pay for your stay here. Are you covered by insurance? No, I am not, the man whispered hoarsely. Can you pay in cash? Afraid I can't, sister. Do you have any close relatives then? Just my sister in New Mexico, he replied, but she's a spinster nun. Nuns are not spinsters, Mr. Smith, the nun replied. They are married to God. That's right, the man said with a smile. So, Bill, my brother-in-law. By the way, the worst time to die of a heart attack is during a game of charades. That's a slow burner right there, I guess, isn't it? Grasshopper goes into a bar. Bartender looks at him and says, "Hey, we got a drink named after you." Bartender, and the grasshopper says, "You got a drink named Steve?" That was one of my bad ones. I'll give you my last bad one, I promise. Skeleton walks into a bar and says, "I'll take a pitcher of beer and a mop." Another slow burner? Just think about how the skeleton drinking. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Notice that the evening news is where they begin with "good evening" and then proceed to tell you why it isn't. I know they say that money talks, but all mine says is goodbye. I have an inferiority complex, but it's not a very good one. My wife told me to stop impersonating a flamingo. I had to put my foot down. Told my boss that 3 companies were after me, and if he wanted to keep me, I needed a raise to stay there. So we haggled for a few minutes, and he gave me a 5% raise. Leaving his office, he stopped and asked me, "By the way, which companies are after you?" And I said, "The gas, electric, and cable company." Might be running out here. Anybody got ones that they want to share while I see if I can? You all know jokes, right? No? All right then.
Okay, I got one.
All right.
This couple's traveling in Florida. They stop at a rest stop south of Tampa, and his wife's named Sarah, and she forgot her drink. Well, they get up by Tampa, and they realize it, and he said, "Well, it's 60 miles, or that's where I messed up." He said it's 60 miles south of Tampa, that's where Sarasota is.
Is that why you were laughing at all my bad jokes too? Man after my own heart. I don't know. It seems like I should have started with this one, but this is your pastor speaking. And this is your pastor shouting. Okay, sorry. Ooh. All right, I'll end on one-liner because that's all I got. What's that? The what? Oh, all right, that's the real story. I'll finish with that one. But, so this is the last one I've written here, and then I'll tell you a story that really happened. First, before you criticize someone, walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you do criticize them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. So, the story Dawn is talking about is long time ago. We went on vacation with the girls and took them to Hershey, Pennsylvania, but we camped in the Nittany Mountains. And I noticed that the back tire in our car was really low. And so I said, I'm going to just drive into town, put some air in it. And that didn't last very long, so I went into the gas station. I'm like, can you tell me where there's a tire shop anywhere? And the person behind the counter looked at me and went, tire? And I'm like, yeah, tire? Nope, no idea. Okay, and I'm confused. I am totally confused. You guys drive cars, I see them on the road. Anyway, go to the next gas station, ask the same thing. Do you know where there's a tire shop here? I need either a patch or a replacement. Tire? At this point, I'm thinking I'm speaking a different language. And I'm like, okay, you know, the rubber thing on the outside of your wheel on the car, I need that, mine either patched or replaced. Nope, I don't know any place. Went to the third station, same response, tire. This time the manager happened to be listening and said, my boyfriend has a junkyard, but he also sells tires there and he can put it on for you. I'll give him a call and he'll come in. Oh, thank God. Great. Meanwhile, Dawn and the girls are back at the campfire wondering if I've died. And the guy finally shows up. And you remember the story about the guy picking the lock on the car door? Well, it was kind of like that. No shoes, big rusted white van, and tattoos everywhere. And in my head, I'm remembering the movie Deliverance. And he says, why don't you follow me and we'll get you the right tire and we'll get you set up. I'm like, fine, that's great. And I follow him, and I follow him, and I follow him, and I follow him. And more I'm hearing banjos in my head. And finally, we get to the junkyard, which is literally out in the middle of the forest. And I get out of the car, and the first thing I see is this huge dog, sitting about that tall, and he is carrying a tree in his mouth. That is not an exaggeration. It was about a 12-foot long sapling, and he had the whole thing, roots and all, in his mouth. And I'm like, oh, so this is how I die. But he was very nice, by the way. he was a very playful dog. I did not throw the tree for him to fetch. But we got there, and sure enough, the guy found the tire, replaced it for me, and just sent me on my way. And I'm leaving thinking, if this is not a lesson for church, I don't know what is, because I thought for sure I was going to die. I thought this was just the end of Scott. And everything by this person's appearance is what we all have, you know, and that idea about what people should look like. Nicest guy, bent over backwards, took care of me. And so I shared some brownies with him. But yeah, that's my funny story she was talking about. And with that, we'll say amen. Because I can smell breakfast, and I went a long